All right, welcome everyone. Today it's my honor to have Pankaj Rai with us. And Pankaj has become a dear friend only in the last, I'd say, year or so, but he is a dear mentor and guide to me in understanding India. He'll introduce himself in a moment. As an Indian American sitting in the US, he's been invaluable in my understanding the current state of industries like global capability centers, GCCs. He's had lots of experience with many organizations at very senior roles. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Pankaj. And Pankaj, please introduce yourself.
Great to be here, and yeah, good to see you in person. In fact, I was thinking, my one of my very good friends is another Bakshi, and he's a turbaned guy. So in my mind, a Bakshi is a turbaned guy, and you are not. So that was the first surprise when I saw you, but that's okay. So anyway, and he's an sort of army type guy. But anyway, you don't look like an army guy at all. So I have worked in consulting, banking, and you can say offshore centers. Within offshore centers with banking company, technology company, and so forth. And now I'm working for a large Indian conglomerate. So yeah, in that sense, I have kind of traversed many diverse industries and functions. In terms of geographies, I have sort of grown up and worked in Delhi for a long time, north of India, briefly in Singapore, and now in Bangalore. So that's my sort of geographical location. But I worked for companies who were headquartered in Europe and US and so forth. So therefore, have had exposure to talking to people in across the world in Australia, Japan, China, European countries, and America, of course. So yeah, I guess that's my brief summary so far.
Thrilled, Pankaj. And by the way, I'll make sure to include a few of the links to your work, like your TEDx talk. So let's warm up into what does respect mean to you, Pankaj? Can you share a bit about what that means in the context of the workplace?
Yeah, I think everything has a purpose. So to me, the term respect signifies the purpose of learning. That if I respect you, I am open-minded, I am listening, and therefore I am learning. So respect to me signifies personal growth and personal learning.
Love it. So let's go there then. There's, the Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset around being a learn-it-all versus know-it-all. Satya Nadella has been at Microsoft, has been instrumental in really instilling that in the Microsoft culture. Is that what, am I on the right track? Is that what you're referring to?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I always look at what does this do? So when people say something, I said, okay, but what does it do? Where's this? So I have this bias to action. So I'm
Yeah,
saying anything can mean anything, but what does it do? And to me, then work backwards. So if I am in a continuous learning growth mindset mode, I better be respectful because only when I'm respectful can I do justice to my purpose.
love that, love that. The other piece in this that I'm going to infer and check with you is checking on blind spots, right? So I don't know everything, and I have blind spots. And if you can probe and ask me, and we can be in conversation to get curious about it, is that also part of the definition then? Is
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, maybe at some point in time I talk about it, but I do have a personal 5C framework. And the first C actually is curiosity, and the last one is communication. And we are doing both right now.
yeah. No, please go ahead. Yeah, share all five of them. That would be great.
So actually, there's a whole derivation and a background to it, but I just tell you the outcome because it was a much longer conversation. So it's basically saying that what have I learned so far in life, and what is my personal framework that describes who I am and what I do. And it is curiosity, which basically means that you're always thinking of learning, growth mindset, all of that. This curiosity leads to compassion, which really means that you're absorbing and you're thinking about others, and so many other things are part of your equation and not just yourself. So you're always expanding your horizon, and your equation of life is adding new variables, if I use data science terms. So curiosity leading to compassion, that leading to conviction, meaning what's my play here? What do I do? I become more convinced about where do I play. That conviction then leads to creativity, saying, okay, then I better be creative and solve it and do something. Then I communicate it, and that communication leads to some feedback, and that goes back to curiosity. So it's like that proverbial Amazonian flywheel, starting with curiosity, leading to compassion, then my conviction, creativity, communication, back to curiosity.
I love it. I've kind of said to myself, I'm not going to bring in the respect quotient much in these conversations, and let's just go with the flow. But that framework really fits well with the respect quotient, and I'll just briefly for you and the audience walk you through it similarly. First, it begins with a scenario, right? A use case would be two executives that don't get along. The whole company knows it. There's a huge impact on the business. One says day, the other says night. So the first step is, of course, are they willing to sit and have an intervention to try and bridge divides? So the first letter in respect in the framework is recognize that we're different, right? So that curiosity ties with your framework around, if I get curious to say, I'm stuck in my way of viewing the world, let's say it's you and me that have the difference, can I just pause and hear you to recognize your perspective on the situation? The next one is empathy. So that's my version. I know we can be here a long time distinguishing compassion and empathy, but empathy really, again, from the place of the next one, which is stretch. So it's 3 layers to keep going deeper, similar to techniques like the 5 whys, because usually the problem that we're trying to solve for is not the first one. It's much, if we dig deeper, we'll get to the real problem statement. Yeah. So, and then jumping, I want the P is basically, once both sides have spoken, the P is finding something, being very realistic. We're not going to solve everything. We're not going to change all our differences. Is there one area we both can prioritize that if we decide to take concrete action and do that conviction, right? My word for that is having commitment for it. That can have a ripple effect. So the last letter is transform, which means when you and I model the behavior as leaders walking that talk, then it ripples through and the behavior changes in the organization to say, oh, okay, my boss has given me, thumbs up to collaborate and work well with the other team. And so they start doing it too. Pankaj, with all your global experience, can you let's just have a conversation around what respect means to you as a leader in India and as a global leader, and what, compare and contrast a bit around how it, just different flavors of this word as we look at a global perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and you may probably relate to it. So in India, for us, respect has been very highly correlated with the elders. So from a very young age, to us, if you were to use the term respect and sort of try and do an autocomplete with an Indian, they'll probably say elders. It's just so deeply rooted in our mind. And therefore, even when we are grown up, when we see an older person, we tend to sort of, in many ways, bow down and agree with them, even if you don't like their ideas. Because from a very young age, we've been told, please respect your elders. And the respect always meant that you don't disagree with them, even if you didn't like what they said. So you kind of just sort of kept quiet or said yes to it. So I think in a professional life, when you see senior people, and in this case, what tends to happen is that you're sitting in India and maybe you're part of a multinational company, and someone else somewhere else is your boss. That person is your sort of father figure, even if they are not older in age. And therefore, the same thing plays up to say, oh, they must be right. And even if I have an alternate point of view, I need not say that. So I think respect has kind of have that connotation for Indian people in general. And therefore, you would find many people outside India tell you that, oh, they always agree with us. They don't disagree with us. And that's not a good thing, because then you're not having a conversation. You're not building diverse ideas together to build something better. And this shows up later on, because clearly, if you did not agree with them, somewhere later on it will show up in not the right outcomes, or you'll do something else, or you'll not do it with your full heart, and so on and so forth. So I see respect uh, as a problem in many ways in these global conversations as far as the Indian people are concerned. And it takes a long while for some of us who are there, and we had younger people in our team, to give them the confidence that, you know what, we are all equals here. And it's our job to bring our ideas to work. And only when we bring multiple ideas together on the table can a better idea emerge. But that is a acquired taste, because that is not how they have grown up. These types of conversation never happen in the family. In fact, many people are so used to even marriages being decided by someone else, such an important decision in your life, that what is this relationship in the office in front of that decision? So I have kind of seen that problem. And then, of course, many of us who were senior in the organization had to work hard to change that default mindset among our team members, and also with our US or European counterparts, to tell them that, you know what, if you talk to this person and they say yes, don't assume that is yes. You need to probe, and you need to really understand whether they are just saying that out of quote unquote respect, or they truly believe in it.
Exactly. Thank you for going there. There's so many angles to this, but thank you. That's really a powerful one. The overlay from a US perspective, at least, and I think it works out with most Western cultures, is in a type A personality world, with outcomes and results. I think we've kind of directly or indirectly gone to binary, that yes or no. So we're perpetuating it by, hey, can you get me that deliverable by tomorrow morning? right? So it's a yes or no. And what I found is if I can be patient and realize that what you're saying is in play and create safe space for that person, usually, a junior person in India, and ask questions. So what are some questions, Pankaj, that you've asked that have helped in your mentoring and coaching, both on the India side with your teams and in raising this with global counterparts or teams that you worked with?
Yeah. I've been in any conversation, I start with the why or the purpose. And usually, actually, we all would have a shared why. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. So I think it's always good to start with saying whether it is a department or a company or a project or whatever purpose that you have come together for. Let's start with where we all have agreement, right? So I think it's always a good place to start that, hey, at least for this one, we are all the same. Like in any company, you would have a purpose or a strategy or a goal or whatever, which is common, and say, okay, and then sort of break it down to where we are today and what is the topic of discussion, and try to understand what are the various perspectives, what are the various approaches, and try to bring them out, because clearly to achieve that goal there must be many different opportunities, strategies. So essentially trying to get a brainstorming going to say, while we agree on the purpose, I'm sure there are many ways to get there. Let's all figure out what are the opportunities, what are the possibilities, and then we'll together figure out the best one for us to pick up and go forward. Now, it may or may not work all the time, but I'm just sharing with you a ideal scenario that I try to do where there's an opportunity. Depending on the time and the context and the number of people, one might have to do some of these things in separate one-on-ones. It may not happen in one call or one meeting, but the idea remains that how do you align everyone on a larger goal? Recognize that this goal can be met in multiple different ways and everyone's idea counts. And then together, using some parameters, come up with one common idea that all of us can agree upon and move forward.
Yeah, excellent. So let's go a little deeper on this one, because as we know, even with the why, right, there can be a lot of divergence on how we really define it. I believe ultimately it ends up being, what's the impact and outcome that we want? Often we start with the why, like increased revenue, but really why increased revenue, right? What's that growth plan? Or so do you have an example, again, nothing confidential, Pankaj, but that, for our listeners, where you can really unpack this? Because what I find often, there's an intersection for me, at least in this topic around, so why being more intrinsic, right? So typically it's purpose, autonomy, mastery. Daniel Pink with the book Drive really did that, distilled that research, curated that research. But often I find there's another bias, cultural bias around, especially in India, focusing much more on the extrinsic. So what's the bottom line? Money, and in business, right? Not just India, but in business.
Yeah. So, I always try to get to things which are fact-based and objective truths to start with, because, you can't start with an phenomena, an idea, and a purpose, because people may have different interpretations. The good thing in most large companies is that we all have annual goals and annual strategies and annual plans, which are all well known and well published. And by and large, we typically try to make sure that our goals in larger teams are in some kind of alignment. So my view always is, what, we are all doing this project, it's in some ways in your goal plan. You want to achieve X, which is why you are there. I have my goal plan. I may have written it differently, but I want to achieve Y. Now, both of these things can be achieved by us together by doing this project. So I think you have to start with a place where you understand that you are interdependent and
Yeah.
both of you are trying to achieve a goal that you individually have, but it is in the larger interest of the organization, the department. So I think I would always start with a place where we are aligned and there's no ambiguity that we are not in it together.
Yeah.
So once you establish the why in that sense, saying, hey, it is an objective why, you have this revenue growth, and my role in that revenue growth is to sort of bring these new leads through my project or whatever, and therefore this will contribute to your why, and my goal is increasing leads, let's say, or whatever. So I think we agree that we are together. We can help each other. We are not at cross purposes. In fact, if I do my job well, it'll help you. If you do your job well, it'll help me. So once this type of why, that we are in it together, and some kind of a trust is established that your goal or your objective is not at cross purpose with mine, I think that initial trust gets established. Then it's a question of, is this the right way? Is that the right way? Should we sequence this way or that way? I've always found that if you do the first part well, establish trust through respect, then some of the other nuances, I think people are willing to sort of give way or allow some experimentation and so forth.
Agreed. Yeah, yeah, and I find that I want to check with you, but once you have that why, the how we do it, there are a million trillion different ways to do the how.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then in between that why and the how is decision criteria, right? So how are we going to pick the ones that we're going to take a bet on? And choosing that gets tricky if you don't have narrowed down, converged decision making. So you're agreeing with that. what guidance would you give US leaders, back to our point about that binary natural approach, which has real advantages, right? It gets back to this example we were just talking about, where yes, to be in a, are you going to get it done or not, is clear accountability, being explicit has great advantages. But how do they tease out, especially if, you know, uh, let's just do a broad sweep with Western binary thinking like that, when they're interacting with teams in, you know, high context cultures like India, right? And I'm referring to Aaron Meyer's work, Culture Map, where low context is being very explicit. High context is, like you gave the example of elders. If that's the underlying at play, but it's not on the surface, one needs to know that in order to then tease out asking those open-ended questions. But yeah, so what guidance would you have for leaders to make sure they can get to that collaborative state faster, right, for mutual benefit of both parties?
I would say that if I'm asked to talk to a US leader now and they seek my guidance on how to engage with a India leader or an India team that they're starting to work with, I would suggest that spend some initial effort and time in understanding the way they work. And I think the best way to start that would be to share how you work. So by the way, in my own team also today, I've created some kind of a user manual of myself, which I've shared with my team saying, hey, here's who I am, here's how we work, open to change. This is Pankaj 1.0. I'll publish one next year, 2.0. In between, this is who I am, right? So something of that sort, if you can start by saying, here's how I work, this is my approach, this is how it has worked, not worked in the past, something like that. Just opening up your style and say, and if they have already worked with teams in India, they can bring some experiences to say, when I work there, this is what I found, or this, or if you haven't worked, you can say, I've heard about it, whatever. So sort of provoke them into then opening up and sharing how they would work. And then kind of coming to some agreement that when we work together, what are the things that we need to look out for and call out for the other person to make that equal trustworthy type of a relationship versus the default might be that you're the boss, I'm waiting for instruction, tell me and that shall be done. So I think they have to imagine that this default would be there, but it's their duty to change the default into an equal relationship of brainstorming and inclusion and coming up with better ideas and so forth.
Yeah, I love it. And as I'm hearing you, Pankaj, that's applicable across the board, like, you know,
Yes,
regardless of
yes,
whether you're
yes,
sitting right here across the table with each other
yeah,
or not.
yeah, yeah,
So can we do that? And I'm also assuming in what you're saying as well, as a leader of a large group, of course, you have the power differential to do that, but I believe you're creating the space for your whole team to do that as well.
yeah,
So that when we become explicit about this is what works for me, for instance, a simple one, you know, I hear so often, it's like, you didn't get back to me on my email, right? And so can you check with the person and go, what's your preferred way to reach out to you if I need you urgently? And I bet people have, you know, that's part of what you're doing, right? And like, you need me urgently, call me on the phone or send me a text or use WhatsApp. Those sort of things end up being such a productivity sink if you don't do them up front. Loved your TEDx talk, and I believe you've done a lot to support women in the workplace.
Again, while we do characterize women in certain ways at a macro level, I think these behaviors also vary from culture to culture, whether it's in the US or UK or Australia or whatever. But in general, I think the common thing that we have found is that women having those milestone years when they are, let's say, taking a break, going on maternity and coming back, which happens to a lot of women. That part, so those milestones have to be managed more appropriately. That how are you dealing with, someone going on maternity leave and coming back? That's one big piece, which is very critical for us to sort of the men folk to appreciate. And some of us who are married and have wives who are working can probably just role model to say, what would I do if that was my wife or my spouse, and so on and so forth. And many a times, actually, if you ask them, they'll say, yeah, I think I'm not thinking straight. And their spouses at home are actually telling them that as well, that actually you don't think straight even at home. So I think just reminding yourself that put yourself in the other shoes and try to imagine. And many a times, if you just did that for a moment, things get sorted out. I think the other one is that we have also, in general, felt that for any promotion or some big assignment, women are far more risk averse in raising their hand versus men. Again, generalities, and therefore, as a male evaluating multiple people, many a time we get more excited by people who are more enthusiastic in raising their hands versus those who are not. And that bias, again, we all know is not correct. Some of us who have been there. So I think just being reminded that, there are population level differences. Now, individuals could be very similar, but there are. So can we cross-check more on those, differences? Like I said, the break part, and then just the attitude of risk-taking part. I think we can just remember those two things. I think I just apply the 80-20 rule. I think we will be good.
No, thank you very much. Actually, I often tell my clients, when I'm consulting with companies, that that re-entry after maternity leave is almost more critical than onboarding a new hire.
Now looking at from the women's perspective. And in the past, I wasn't doing that as much as I started to do later on to say it's not just the men who I have to coach. I need to also coach the women. So now what I would do is I'll say, again, some of them who are married, I say, how attentive is your husband? And say, those guys don't get it. Okay. I said, okay. So this boss of yours, why do you think he'll be different? So it's your duty and responsibility to educate him just like you do at home. So again, sort of bringing that perspective, say, don't assume that they get it, and don't assume that they will figure it out.
Yeah.
If your guy at home is not figuring out things, why do you think this guy sitting here has figured it out? So coach them, and even if it requires some influencing from others, whatever, do that. If you think he may or not listen to you, maybe there are others who they listen to, which we do all the time in the family. So many a times I'm starting to bring a sort of a family perspective to work to say, you know what, in your family, you do influence other people to get things done. We do it all the time. So why are you so conscious of saying everyone in office is so smart that they get it all the time and they don't need any influencing whatsoever? So just imagine we are all humans. We all have our own, difficulties. Even if people are very senior and have gray hair, they're all the same. And there are many of them in your families who don't get it. So these guys are like that only. So
I love that. I'm smiling, Pankaj, because I think we're still have a long ways to go globally. I know this is a generalization around how we talk about bringing your whole self to work and bringing your strengths. If we really demystifies, what it means to be in the workplace, regardless of whether it's in person or remote, encouraging people to think about where in your life are you making decisions and how can that impact how you show up as a leader? Because I believe all of us are leaders to the betterment of yourself and your organization to bring the best forward. Parting words on how to be more respectful, and really with a little bit of context around, I hope you agree that we are in a pivotal point around divides around the world, not just in the US. And one of my goals with this effort is how can we give people tips and tools so that we don't shy away from conversations of differences and rather lean into them so that we get curious, which you opened with. But yeah, any parting words and tips for the audience?
I mean, the messaging that I do these days is to say, I mean, everyone is looking inward, whether it is tariffs or deglobalization or what have you. Some of the world is going in the other direction of curiosity and compassion that we both spoke about. And if you look at the demand side, what does the world really need? Very macro. If you look at big global problems, global warming, terrorism, what have you, all require collaboration and compassion. You look at all these successes of the private sector, they are all ecosystems. No one is doing anything alone. They're all, tied up. So the world seems to need more of collaboration, more of compassion, more of coming together. And somehow, for various, in my opinion, short-term reasons, people are looking inward. So I actually say that, think about it as a hedge fund manager. What is in going to be in high demand and short supply? That's what you accumulate. So I would say, demand is clear. Collaboration is compassion is going to win in the long run. So better start accumulating compassion and collaboration now when everyone else is not doing it. You will be the winner hedge fund manager if you are a capitalist. And if you're altruist, you don't need me to be telling you this anyway.
Love it, Pankaj. Thank you with that. That really ties with I say it often that soft skills are the hard skills, right? So they really have direct business impact. Well, it's been an honor. Thank you so much.